I don't think it's like a mistake that we always refer to media as like consumption, right? We don't have another word that isn't basically the same way we describe food or drink. And I think that's really telling. We 100% get filled by bits. There's such a difference between sitting down and eating potato chips all day versus having a salad, right? There are nutrition layers to media. Information wants to be free. Networks want to flow. We need to experiment as much as possible, yes, but we cannot hurt the network flowing. I don't think the average person out there cares if VR works or not. I think the average person cares if it unlocks a new relational experience for them.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting episode of NEWFORUM, the Web3 podcast, bringing together creators, visionaries, and investors to spark accessible conversations on the topics of crypto, the metaverse, and everything Web3. And on today's episode, I'm super honored because I have Reggie James with me, who is the CEO and co-founder of Eternal. And Eternal is a ticketing and artist platform. And I'm super keen because I'm going to discuss with Reggie today our online identities, what images have to do with that, and technology. And as well, we're going to talk about Eternal more. Hi, Reggie. I'm happy to have you on today.
Hello, good morning from Brooklyn. It's snowing. Don't like it.
Well, good morning. Yeah, Reggie, we're super happy to have you on. I mean, we've been following you a while on the internet, but I would love for you to maybe sum up your journey so far and also how you came to founding Eternal.
For sure. The journey's a windy road, like any journey, and it can start anywhere from growing up in the Poconos to college to, wherever. But I think like a lot of young people after school, I went through a period of just deschooling. I think academically, school was always a mixed bag for me in terms of value alignment and what I had to do versus what I wanted to do. And after school, finally having that freedom just allowed me to like dive into books and kind of just connect with a peer group that I didn't have access to before. And after working at a few places, I was introduced to my now co-founder, Luca, through a friend, Cami, who's the founder of Parade. And I flew out to LA and slept on his couch. Never had met him before. And we just talked about identity and kind of like the next wave of identity, very much in like a kind of new social media context, not in a Web3 context. We weren't as hip, but still, very deep value alignment to where Web3 is in terms of a sense of multiplicity, a sense of where can I go with this form of myself versus where can I go with this other form of myself. All these things that I think we've probably played with from honestly really early primitive tools right now in Web3, but I think are going to take on a much more almost clothing-like sensibility. At least that's my hope, right? And so Eternal went through its journey, just like I went through a personal journey. And this time it was kind of together in a sense of togetherness. And we started building kind of like avatars and kind of worlds on mobile, kind of thinking about what happens when a kid ages out of Minecraft, ages out of Roblox. Very metaverse thesis, like really raw metaverse thesis. And before that was kind of like buzzwordy. And once we came out of the pandemic, we just had a lot of artist friends kind of hitting us up, needing support from how should we be engaging kind of like this new landscape of tech, and we're allowed to be out of our homes again. We need to kind of produce music in a new way. And so that really shifted the company from, this kind of metaversey social world to powering artists in short. And we built a 3D ticketing app where you kind of collect these digital objects in a locker, as well as we turn the avatar social product into a virtual venue. So now artists kind of come in and do these virtual shows, as well as do full on, Bushwick warehouse raves, right? And that's kind of the it's really just trying to build a new tool set for artists from this live events kind of framework today, and then seeing where those tools take us for the next couple of years.
It's super interesting because I feel like with a lot of people building in the space, they build really for the tech side and they kind of forget a bit like the cultural side. It looks like some of the projects are not as dense. They're built on the internet. They're formed maybe during the pandemic, but with Eternal, I feel like you're having you're catching a moment, a vibe, and a community kind of into the project, and that's, I think, really interesting. How do you see like online identities evolve with the means of technology that we have? Like, how can social networks better foster like diversity, inclusion? And for me, for example, I feel like it's so hard to narrow down your own identity on the internet, right? You're always kind of like caging yourself in a way. And, yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, maybe.
Yeah, I think the current landscape of social networks are what I call kind of performative distribution, right? And in a performance, you take on a sort of character, and inherently for that character to be legible, you sort of flatten the multiple parts of yourself into that readable character, right? And so we end up scaling this flattened version of ourselves for a sense of legibility, for a sense of, being touched, right? Social networks are about being touched. It's why your phone buzzes and it's connected to your leg, right? That's like someone just poking you from afar. So that's where we are today. And there's a lot of benefits to that. I'm reading this book. It's by Kevin Kelly. It's like 10 rules for the networked economy or something like that. And he talks about fax machines, and because it's written in like 98, 99, right? So he's talking about fax machines, and he's talking about like the value of each fax machine, and how it increases with each one that comes online. And basically we've like exploded that millions fold, right? Like the value of Twitter is immense because of each person that's kind of contributing to this open public forum. Okay. So now that we know where we are, it's like, where are we going, right? So if before we were kind of flattening and distributing ourselves, what's next? I think, at least for Eternal, the way that identity is currently being built is through participation, right? And so in a flat distribution kind of layer of social, you create a residual of participation, right? I put up my phone and I say like, boom, I like captured this thing, I participated in it, but that's really fakeable. Residuals are fakeable. And I think some of the tension we see with maybe some AI generated art is like, oh, you can kind of fake process and come out with a really clean residual. That's not true. And so, yeah, Eternal is about participation, right? And to that point of like collecting these 3D objects that kind of show that is kind of a token of participation. It's not even on chain, but it's just the philosophy of, I went to this show the same way you used to save ticket stubs as a kid when you went to see One Direction or whatever. It's like, I went to this show, I have the proof of this show in this digital object, and I can do something with this object or take this object elsewhere. But it's foolproof, right? Kia, Kei, she wrote this essay called Inventories, Not Identities, right? And it's kind of this idea around the collection of objects and participation is going to be far cleaner of a marker of who one is, rather than just kind of spouting, riffing, what have you. And I tend to believe that. I think it's kind of analogous to our interiors, like of our home. Like you learn a lot about a person based on what they have in their house. I think that will be true for living life online as well. Games do this quite naturally.
I really like that, and it's like I had a curator here for Boiler Room, and he said something like he created all these shows, but he didn't get any credit. He's just a curator. He's not the artist, so he didn't get any credits for it. And the artist later blowing up, and he could never like say that he was actually part in it. I mean, he can say, but he can never prove that he actually worked on all of these things. And I think these are some things that are really benefits of like having the social identity on chain, or like you said, having these assets like backing that up. I mean, there's also some drawbacks of gamifying our whole life or our whole identity, kind of like, and also our community. I feel like I think about like how much time we spend online, and the minute we unplug, it's kind of like, whoa, like where have I been all this time, And
Yeah.
I'm also wondering, you mentioned in a conversation with Eugene, I think you mentioned images, like you guys focus a lot on images and how you always need some kind of image to focus on as a community or as like a person. I think that that's really interesting because I was thinking about vision boards and how people make like vision boards and, they always
Yeah.
need something to strive forward to. And brands need that as well, right? Fashion brands live off like kind of like having like images for their collections and things. But is there ever like, first of all, how do you know when to stop? For me, for example, I get this like image fatigue. I don't know if
Mm.
you know this, but when you consume so much content or images, you kind of like get an image fatigue. And I'm wondering for you, like how do you release and draw back maybe? And how do you create like a community or a world where there's a balance for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I wrote this little riff about, I don't think it's like a mistake that we always refer to media as like consumption, right? We don't have another word that isn't basically the same way we describe food or drink. And I think that's really telling. We 100% get filled by bits. I was looking at a vintage like Teletubby like visuals, and I thought what was so funny is like they have screens on their bellies, and I was like, whoa, like that's so accurate. Like we all kind of like take this screen and we put it inside of us and we kind of just like regurgitate it. It's like, have you seen that video where it's just like, oh god, it's all day. I think like anything else, there's such a difference between sitting down and eating potato chips all day versus having a salad, right? There are nutrition layers to media, and it's really different if I sit down and watch a couple interviews on YouTube versus just scrolling on TikTok for 3 hours, which we all need sometimes you need that. So then I think when you have that recognition for yourself, what does that mean when it turns into kind of producing media or culture as a company, right? Because we produce a lot of media. We have multiple like TikTok shows, and it's really interesting. It's a really hard tension, right? I think we kind of take an approach of treating it like an art form and making the best video possible. Recently we've just been talking about like the hero's journey. Like, how do we take someone on a hero's journey in 1 minute while not like diluting as much as humanly possible, like not diluting what is being conveyed. And particularly if you go to like some of our earlier TikToks, I think it's like really, really clean. And if you look at Enzo the Magazine, which is another brand just within the Eternal umbrella, I think their video essays are also really, really clean in this kind of social exploration. So I think in general, Tremaine Emery says this thing called culture is caring. I think there's a lot of people that are producing for the sake of growth, producing as a function of this is what the environment is, and so I will flood it. And you get a lot of sludge that way because they don't care. I think Boiler Room is a great example of a brand that like really cares. And when you look at their mission, it's like connecting like club and rave culture through media. So it's something along that lines, right? Like it's really clear that they care and they bring that care globally. In short, we need more brands like that and more brands that are willing to take that level of care to all of their production, right? We don't have like love technology brands anymore. I think that's really sad, I think it's for a lack of care.
Yeah, so I would love to know, like, where do you see like the ecosystem of Eternal evolve to? Like, I mean, you've been in the tech space now, I don't know for how long, but like things that you see and where you're like, okay, I would love this to evolve like this and change into that direction instead of where it's going, or something like where we could go, where we could do better, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll start with Eternal because that's just, the cleanest. I think we are in a reckoning of current institutions. So, like I said, in the most basic way, Eternal does ticketing. And despite, us financing artist shows and blah, 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 like the app is a ticketing app and it's a virtual events app, right? And the reality is like right now, ticketing is a monopoly, right? Ticketmaster is under like high levels of scrutiny. It is really abusing both consumers and artists. It's making a worse experience despite their economies of scale. And they haven't innovated, and God knows how long. And so, you know, I haven't like said this publicly, but basically, you know, I want to out innovate Ticketmaster, which I don't think is hard. But I think it's not sexy, and so no one has done it. And then even companies like Dice have basically copied the Ticketmaster Live Nation playbook, not made a new playbook, right? And you can just see this on the way that people interact with that brand. It's not like they love Dice, right? These are people connecting you to artists. You should love any brand that's connecting you to artists that you love, right? And so that I really think Eternal is that simple at times. I really think it's as simple as rethinking what ticketing and the audience artist relationship can be like. And out of that, we get to do a lot of really incredible things. We produce shows, and we produce the creative behind those shows, and we work with artists, right? It's the most fun job in the world. Can be stressful, you know, depending on the artist, but even those chaotic ones, you know, are some of my favorites, and we get to have dinner, and it's great, and we work on really big ideas. But that's the Eternal mission. Start with ticketing, have already out innovated by having an entire virtual events platform, which is far easier to produce in compared to a Fortnite virtual concert, and just go really deep there and allow the tools that we built for artists from this base keep proliferating out and out. I think there's a huge business and a huge impact there on a global scale, because we all love going to shows, full stop. We all get really informed on who we are based on shows that we've been to, full stop. We fall in love at shows, you know, so that's Eternal. On a broader technology lens, you know, I'm really obsessed with hardware, like super obsessed with hardware. I think that we've really hit the long tail of the mobile S curve. I think we'll probably have one more breakthrough there in a funny way, but it's not shocking to me that everyone is trying to figure out new hardware. Apple, Facebook, or Meta, or whatever, even Microsoft, like they're all thinking about AR, VR. And then you have people like Humane doing kind of like this projection joint, which is cool. You have this company that I'm an investor in called Emerge that's kind of building what looks like a iPad almost that sits on your desk and produces subsonic waves to produce like a touch field, basically. Really, really special technology, just like maybe too big of a bunny hop from like point and click, you know. I think that something I've been meditating a lot and coming off of my most recent trip is remembering that the iPhone was really an extension and shrinking of the Mac, and they utilized the iPod to shrink that ecosystem. But the iPhone and the iPod are two very different things, right? Like the iPhone ran Mac OS from the jump. That's not what the iPod did. iPod had its own insular economy with iTunes, and the device created something special. STEM Player is trying to do a very similar thing. It's like a very specialized device. It has its kind of buddy software. And I think that's kind of the problem, is like the software is not strong enough yet, despite the device being interesting. And so I think we're going to see more what I would just call indie hardware, right? Like everyone kind of went crazy over the most recent Teenage Engineering.
I was just about to say, yeah. Yeah. That was in my head.
Yeah, it was incredible. And, you know, it reminded people like, shit, like we can build long-standing, hard businesses, beautiful businesses that make a profit and scale at the pace that they feel like it should scale at, right? And they just raised a really big round, but they spent years between raising rounds, right? And I think that's really inspiring to everyone. I think in an age where people came out of basically just building and sprinting on like SaaS companies that no one's ever going to remember, to see like something Teenage Engineering just produce beautiful work on their own, produce beautiful collaborative work with the likes of, you know, Virgil Abloh. They're like, shit, like, what have we let technology become? And again, culture is caring. I don't think that many people care about SaaS businesses. I don't think that many people care about B2B software. And I'm not saying those things aren't important. I'm just saying we've really flooded the world with that. And that's okay. It made a lot of things efficient. I'm sure I'm not even giving it the credit that it's due. But I think when it comes to like a spiritual understanding of what technology is and its reflection of each other and what it can be in terms of its relational glue, I think people are really, especially with the most recent layoffs, I think a lot of people are reevaluating their relationship to building technology. I think that's also why we're seeing a lot of, particularly design boys, but just in general, people going off and building furniture, people going off to like attack fashion when they've never done that before, right? We've never really seen such large intersectional communities. And I think a lot of good things are gonna come from that. And a lot of things that, I don't know if you remember Google, I think it was Google, made this like jean jacket with Levi's. And it's like you touch the sleeve and it like did a thing and like you could do this and it like picked up your call. And it was for biking, basically. And it was really cool. But it kind of just showed you like, yeah, we can like create, I'm not saying that's the model, but what I am saying is like we can create really interesting intersectional beautiful objects, right? And we don't have to wait for Apple to do it. We shouldn't wait for Apple to do it because they have their own monopoly woes going on that we can't rely on the ghost of Steve Jobs. But yeah, I think in short, people have to recognize all of their heroes are dead. The kids need someone to look up to. It can be you. Do with that as you like, do with that as you will.
I love that. It's like you think to yourself, like, okay, what would they like? I'm always thinking, like, what would Virgil or Steve Jobs do right now with the knowledge they have and with all this like metaverse evolving and things happening within like the blockchain space? I'm like, how would they use it? But it's actually like it makes a lot of sense. Like we had this massive boom of like crypto technology, everything happened, and now it's just like reducing to the things that actually make sense, right? Like, or things that actually drive something forward. I'm thinking about like spatial, for example, like the thing that they're building, I think is really interesting. But it just makes sense to not have an overflow of technology or companies that do like things that nobody really like needs or whatever, And you mentioned like DICE, and I think this was really interesting because I always thought like I have all these tickets to events I went to, but I can't really do anything with it. Like now I can look at them on an app, but like what is there really like, it's nice though, because you can think about all of the memories, like you said, like you make so much memories, shows, festivals. It's like one of the best times in your life, and you can't really do anything about it. Like the communities around it is like there's a couple of communities forming around events like Boiler Room or Circle Loco or whatever, but it's not really, you don't really have like a touch point of thing. Yeah. So that's really exciting. I'm looking forward to that. I think you mentioned like the metaverse somewhere, and for you also mentioning AR, and I'm wondering from your perspective, like what do you think about the metaverse in general, and like how do you think it's going to play out, or how is it going to look like, or do you think we're already like kind of in the zone, or is this like just another buzzword? Like I want to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think like a couple reference points are like key, right? So I read Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. I loved Snow Crash, rocked my world. Obviously, there's Ready Player One, which is kind of like jack in, play, shoot 'em up, lore, deeply gamer heavy. And then I just watched Sam Altman's like fireside chat with Reid Hoffman from Greylock. And it was like 4 months ago. And he said, and he kind of described the metaverse as a new container for software similar as the iPhone. And that I thought was really interesting. And I haven't fully wrapped my head around it because typically when we talk about the metaverse, there's always like two kind of schools of thought. There's literal VR, always on world, right? That you enter and it's a universe much bigger than anything you could explore IRL. And then the other one is like, well, it's actually just like a sense of portability across the internet, and form factor doesn't really matter. But neither one of those, I guess technically the game world does act as like a software container, right? If there is a kind of like blocks company at the center of it, and then all these companies exist within it, similar to in theory Twitter exists within Apple. That's just like reality, right? it's a mobile app. I think that it's going to kind of play out in like this exhalation way. So exhalation has this one short story called Life Cycle of a Software Object, something like that. And it's kind of like this person has this digital robot that's basically a child, and it's like raising this child. And then that game world is starting to like lose funding, basically. And they're trying to like build a port to this other game. They port to this other game, but then that game like world isn't like performing as well either. And they can't actually port it to this thing that I guess like the capital has like pushed to. And that I think is really real, right? There's going to be experiences that are VC backed that are going to be really incredible, and people are going to have a deeper emotional tie to, because the experience is going to be so vivid. And it's going to port, maybe it's going to port again, but at some point there's just going to be one place where you can't port it to, right? There's going to be some place where you can't bring part of your old object, your old identity to. And I think it's going to hurt more than it hurt when, you know, people abandon Tumblr. And I think that's going to be the very human side of the metaverse. I think it's actually just going to be much deeper from a relationship standpoint that we have both to each other and to the history of that relationship as it gets visualized, and to objects that we interact with, particularly when you think about an object kind of souped up with like Chat GPT functionality, right? Because that's only going to improve. And so the idea of like raising a digital object, the same way you raise and grow your like Twitter identity and persona, is going to be really different when it's embodied in this other thing, because you're going to have just very human instincts towards it. So I think it's going to be essentially interconnected kind of shells for software. It's going to be really rich. It doesn't really matter if it's AR, VR, mobile. It's just going to be more rich. So we're going to feel it in a much deeper way. And it's going to break at times. So yeah, I really try to view it as humanly as possible, because I think it's one thing to say, yeah, it's a VR app. And it's another thing to say, it's somewhere where you spend 30% of your day with your friends, with your family, and with new objects that you can't fully see just yet, but you're going to be emotional towards. And that I think is what people want at the end of the day. I don't think the average person out there cares if VR works or not. I think the average person cares if it unlocks a new relational experience for them. I think everyone cares about that, because it makes being human really rich. And that's kind of what we're all after at the end of the day.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just thinking about my friends who had multiple Instagram accounts, right? Like these archive accounts, and he grew them like to this great communities, and then they all shut him down like after a while, and he had to start over again. And I was just like, I wouldn't have started over again, you know, like after, but yeah, you get like emotionally attached to the things that you build, right? It's like
yes.
anything else, like a physical business, if you have like a shop or a store, you also want that to grow or to like, you know, flourish, or like a garden.
Mm-hmm.
Or I mean, it's just that it's digital, and because we spend so much time there and we spend so much time with others as well, we get attached to these communities or ideas or even projects. And it's like it's gonna be interesting. I even think about the idea of like, you know, people now have their avatar, like they have influencers, like, you know, they have AI influencers that they take care of, that they take on vacation. And I was just like, whoa, like this is gonna be interesting. As well as I'm thinking about all my creative friends with the tools, like you just mentioned AI, and that there's a new tool, I think, that you can make music with AI and other people's voices and stuff. And I'm like, this is gonna unlock a whole nother level. I mean, for me, it's really fun to play around with these like things and see what's happening, but also what are the potential like drawbacks of like gamifying our life like this, you know? Like, do you think we're gonna have a period of time where we're just gonna all shut our phones off and try to like
I mean, maybe. My friend has like a DJ series, and the whole premise is like throwing your phone in the lake. So yeah, I mean, maybe I think there will be actually a lot of counterculture, anti-digital waves coming up. We've seen a few, nothing like too extreme, nothing that really caught fire. But I do think there will be people who are just like, yo, we're returning to the 60s, man. We're throwing our phones in the lake. We're farming. And that'll be good too. On the drawbacks question, in some of my earlier writing on crypto, I really tap into my main fear, which is when financials are so legible, do we erode our potential for hospitality? And by that, I mean, it's like, I don't know if you remember the startup Earn. I think it was like Balaji startup, but basically it was like you could pay a little Bitcoin to email like these like people like Bill Gates or whatever. And then it wasn't accepted until they responded, something to that point, right? And the goal was scale, right? Like the goal was you could pay a little Bitcoin to message anyone. And I'm just like, that feels like a step back. Like Twitter exists. All these companies have pretty much public directories. Like, I don't know if I want to pay Bitcoin. I don't want to receive Bitcoin for someone to feel like they can have some higher right to talk to me. It was just one of those really clean examples, or is the example I go back to a
I
lot.
don't know if you know, but this already exists in a way. Like,
Again,
yeah, I mean, it's not like that, but there's like things where you can pay VCs to introduce you to other networks and things like that. So
oh,
there's
Jesus.
already like there's something like that. I mean, it's not on the blockchain, but there's definitely something like that happening.
Yeah, and listen, I think there's merit to network hacking. I don't know. But yeah, even that feels gross. It's like, yo, what are your management fees for? Like your job is to just introduce people and make decisions. You're trying to make more on top of that. But exactly to my point, it erodes our capacity for hospitality. And I think hospitality is so important to what it means to be human, right? Like the ability to come to a table, not expect anything from the other side, that side not expect anything from you except respect and shared humanity. When you messaged me, I didn't say, oh, well, if you want me on the pod, send me a rack. No, it's just like, oh, you know what? You've done interesting conversations. I'm down for an interesting conversation. I have the space in my schedule. Let's do it. And there's so much external value that comes from hospitality. And I really, really do believe in, and maybe it's just like my faith, but I really do believe in kind of the downstream effects of doing things for free for the good of like the network for whatever, right? Because eventually, and this always happens, one kid will see it and it will touch them in a way that you never thought it would touch them, right? And the more we put up these kind of financial legibility layers to that kid getting touched, that's like 10 times worse than paywalls on, the Washington Post or whatever, right? Information wants to be free. Networks want to flow. We need to experiment as much as possible, yes, but we cannot hurt the network flowing. If you hurt the network flowing, you're anti-internet, full stop. And yeah, that's always the biggest drawback to me. We're like going to stop flow in some really ridiculous way, and it's not going to be net good.
Yeah, keep the gatekeepers away. Like,
Yeah.
no, but it's really like that. Like, and you never know, like there could be one person who you wouldn't have considered in the room that could change the whole room, right? Just because of their ideas and whatever. And like you said, keeping that flow away is like not what we're trying to do. Reggie, I had so much fun on this conversation.
This was a really fun chat. I feel like I rambled a bit, but hopefully that's okay.
Yeah, we'd love to know like what we can expect and where we can follow Eternal.
On Twitter and Instagram, I'm Hip City Reg. I've had that username since I think college. Eternal is Eternal Till I Die on Instagram and TikTok. We have a lot coming up this year. We're working with a lot of incredible artists. We are going to do really dope things that I'm contractually not allowed to talk about. But if you love live music, if you love, really just really experiencing artists really closely, definitely follow along. And then yeah, in terms of kind of seeing that play out, if you're not in New York or LA, it's really just on socials. It's nothing more complicated than that. And then if you like to try, virtual events, Eternal Plus on the App Store. The literal plus sign, not Eternal Plus spelled out.
Definitely. We're going to link everything down below. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. And I see you guys and everyone in the next episode of New Forum.